I call him Dr. Tsigabu, but his official name is Dr. Tsigabu Asmelash. Dr. Tsigabu was born in Karan, Eritrea, and grew up in Ethiopia. Lived with his mom and grandparents in Asmara, Eritrea. He's married, a father of 2 beautiful girls. Earned his BSc in geology from University of Addis Ababa, his master's degree from ITC in the Netherlands in mineral exploration and information science, and University of Akron, Ohio, USA, geophysics, and PhD from Western Michigan University in biogeochemistry. Woo! It's a lot. Okay. He worked from junior to senior on mineral exploration, geochemistry in Eritrea, in Rift Resources, Sanu and Nefsen. Last, before leaving for graduate school, worked on detailed exploration work of Bisha Gold Mine with Nefsen Resources. Impressive. He did postdoctoral research at the University of Oklahoma, environmental forensics for 2 years, and University of Idaho National Laboratory, environmental bioremediation for 4 years. He taught environmental science and natural resources at Towson University, Maryland for 5 years. Currently working at as SharePoint developer and administrator in information technology. He's been an activist for human rights and democratic change in Eritrea since 2003. Formerly as a member of EYC, Eritrean Youth for Change, board member in EYSC, Eritrean Youth Solidarity for Change, and founding member of YACL in USA. Currently serving as core team member of Al-Baharnet since 2011, and executive board member of Seedling for Peace and Democracy in Eritrea, aka FELC, and coordinator of this symposium on why we need the regime change in Eritrea. Thank you, Dr. Tsigabu, for all you do, and I welcome you to the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, the Mabzoom, those of you who are following us in Zoom. My presentation is going to be, was going to be at the start, introducing FELC, but we've been pushing it, and he was, almost my boss was, he was going to take it to the next symposium, but I insisted I do it today. When I say coordinator, is under Yosef Gabriel. He has been an amazing person, approaching almost, I can say about 50 people. 50 people. And that's I'm downsizing the number of people that he contacted to be present in this symposium, and I cannot thank him enough. To contact 50 people and talk to them about this and explain to them why is it necessary, not just Eritreans, Tigrayans, Oromo, Amhara, Somali, Sudanese, almost everyone in the world. He was trying to, whoever has knowledge on this in this area, or political or humanitarian activism in Eritrea and the Horn of Africa. So thank you, Yosef. So why do we need FELC? And I'm going to talk a little bit about why are we in this situation. You heard Dr. Jerusalem, you heard Dr. Rubin, you heard Amani Lassana, you heard everybody explaining the situation that Eritreans are, and the role that, the destructive role that a regime that we thought is ours, causing chaotic environment after chaotic environment, just not just in Eritrea, but in the whole.
The noise system. The voice.
Oh. يسمعنا له؟ يسمعنا له؟ أبزوم زلهم تسمعنا لهم؟ تحت له اوكي هذا عاوكب الكفتنين. So why are we in this situation and what is the way out? Of course, everybody presented from Dan Cornell to the last presenter was Hauna Aluni up defining Isaias. Who is Isaias? Not just Isaias, but there are multiple layers of abusers in Eritrea. Multiple layers. It's not just one person that caused all this havoc. There are instruments that caused this situation that we are in Eritrea. So, Eritrea, as a sovereign nation, why is it sovereign nation? We'll define the sovereignty of Eritrea and PFDJ's ruling and its relationship with neighboring countries and international community. The quest for change. Why do we start change, questing for change? Why do we think we need Felsi and likes of Felsi in the Eritrean opposition in diaspora and inside the country? The binding principles that abide those organizations and individuals under Felsi or working with Felsi. So at last I will say a little bit about the way out of our current misery and future of Eritrea. So Eritrea is a sovereign nation. It was defined by the colonial borders, like colonial powers that came to Africa in the scramble for Africa in 1890s and after. In 1889 and 1896, there were two treaties that were signed by the then Imperial of Ethiopia, Menelik, and with Italy and France. Of course, those are the colonial powers never in bordering Eritrea at that time. Most often Ethiopians define TPLF as the guarantors of Eritrea as a nation or as a sovereign country. But it was Menelik who did that. It was Menelik that divided the two brotherly people. There are certain Eritreans that say, oh, we are not Tagaru, we are Eritreans, they are Tagaru. That was a defined border that was by these treaties that divided these two countries or two brotherly people into two nations, okay? So that happened to all of the countries around the world, not just in Africa, in Latin America, even in Europe. Colonial powers defined the borders. So we could be brothers and still have a sovereign borders that define us. That shouldn't be a divide of our mentality or a divide of our brotherhood. We are neighbors. So that is one thing that I keep hearing from Eritreans who are even in the justice seeking, who are working for Eritrean humanitarian activism or quest for change in Eritrea. So this notion of Tagaro are different, we are different. We didn't come, God didn't bring us and put us in like a parachute in these two villages. We were brothers, we were one powerful tribe and one point, one of the most civilized kingdoms in the world, one of the four. At that point, there were four civilizations in the world, and Aksumite civilization was one of them. And we defined Aksumite kingdom. We, Eritreans and Tagaro, defined the Aksumite kingdom, including, of course, the rest of Ethiopia, and the rest of Eritreans also belong to that. So, became officially again a sovereign nation after 1993. 1991, we got our independence from Ethiopia. We call it independence, of course, as in a quotation. Again, it is true, because we are independent now, because we were given a border, a boundary by the colonial powers, like all the African countries, between Uganda and Kenya, between Uganda and Ethiopia, Uganda and Rwanda. So all those countries are defined by the colonial scramble for Africa. Then in 1991, after, of course, the 2 years of working for referendum, we voted, Eritreans voted for independence majority of Eritreans, of course, 98%, 99.98 at that point. God forbid if we get referendum now, I don't know how much we will get. So why do we have that? Why we start questioning about our independence or about our sovereignty? Because of the abuses that Yerushalayim was mentioning, the abuses that Yosef Gabriwot, Asena Asena, and so many other speakers were mentioning. Those causes, the more troubles, the more situations that cause to question your Eritreanism. The more we go in these kind of situations, the more we get far away from that sovereign, that love of that nation. So 9th century, of course, Eritrean, that was the religion after the referendum. The Eritrean, of course, before that, we can't even mention the 1991, 1992. There were lots of high-ranking officials like Bitodet, for example. He was arrested in 1991 for just standing for Eritrea as a movement. So that style of brutality and non-accountability started in 1993, basically with the shooting of the disabled veterans. Earlier, our little brother Shishai was mentioning why Tegadilti, even within the fighters, there was a division within the Gadli generation. Just who was at first, who was before 1985 or 1987, or who were about in 1991, 1990. Those are labeled different Tegadilti. Naitis'a, Naiwagahta. It was labeling and Gabar, of course, to divide the society into those kind of situations. So it started its brutality by detaining its own body. People who fought for Eritrea were starting to be arrested. But the real, like Dan Connell was mentioning the day before yesterday, he was mentioning when it started, the dilemma, the real clip of Isaias into power came in 2001 with the arrest of the high-ranking officials and the known journalists who were our classmates, youngsters looking bright about bright features of Eritrea. They were writing very good articles. In fact, they were so nice to the government at that time. They were not exposing the government to the court, but they still get arrested. That started the real non-democratic way of course, in a sovereign country. But in Meda, of course, Amanil can attest to that. There were people who were languishing in Hala Sora and under Hibit Selfie. So prior to that, and mainly after the 2001 episode or incident, there were lots of opposing, especially from the ELF, the original Eritrean Liberation Front, who started the movement for independent Eritrea. They started opposing the system right in 1991. They were explaining the true nature of Hegdef or Sha'bi at that time to the Eritreans and to the world. But nobody was listening in 1991. People were being kicked out from meetings for telling the truth that we see nowadays. One of them is Yosef Gabriwot. He was mentioning a lot about what happened to Eritreans. Why do we lose all this industrialization under the Isaias regime? And how it was brutal. Then the first youth-led organization, of course, started in 2003 in South Africa by a group of Eritreans who were sent to study in South Africa for graduate and undergraduate classes. And those were, of course, supported by their friends and families and people who were cautious about the humanitarian situation in Eritrea, support financially and ideologically as well. And 3 years later, in 2008 and 2009, a huge group of Eritrean youth came to start questioning for change. At that moment, of course, we were looking for what? stop national service, make it definite national service, constitution to be implemented, and prisoners of consciousness should be released. And that, and of course, just 2 years or 3 years before the Arab Spring began, and of course after Arab Spring, the likes of EYAC, Simrat, Brumetzai, all these Hadinet Nifetid, all those organizations were mostly controlled or mostly led by the youth group were working. And again, all we were asking was for the release and for the national service to be actual national service instead of a national slavery. Of course, in 2018, something big happened, and even though I disagree with most people, what Mella said in 2009 or prior to that, and what Abiy said in 2018 are exactly the same. They didn't, both of them didn't implement it, but they both say the same. But we Eritreans will label the Tigrayan side of the opposition. The Amharas label the Tigrayans as the Gentayo, which are anti-Bal, those divided Ethiopia into two. That caused to ETPLF and the EPRDF in general a havoc in Ethiopia. In other words, they couldn't rule the country. There were uprisals that was coming because, not just because of their, of course they are not a Democrats that we envision to see in the Horn of Africa, but they were being challenged just because of the Eritrean independence. And what do we do as Eritreans? We side with Ethiopians. We side hating the Tigrayans, especially the Weyane or the ETPLF. So when that peace, ill-devised peace started in 2018, a lot of Eritreans began to question the real situation in our country. First, the fear of invasion of Ethiopians to Eritrea. Then, when the isolation of the Eritrean opposition within Ethiopia and also the Tigrayans started to be isolated from the rest of the Ethiopians, we started, a lot of Eritreans started to discuss about how to work to get rid of this man. We've been asking for the system to get rid of, but in 2020, the discussion started because of the tendencies that were shown by that unknown agreement between Abiy and Isaias. Then, following the actual formation, that discussion started, of course, because it was about the start of, I remember in August of 2020, most of the Eritrean oppositions were looking in detail of the situation. Are we sure that this guy is not going to encircle Tigray? Because the tendency was isolating Tigray, he goes to Awasa, he goes to Gondar, everywhere in Ethiopia. That tension showed most Eritreans start to question those and start a discussion. The famous Atv Asena, he said, we have to work with Tsigabu to get rid of this man. Because he is working with Ethiopians to get rid of Tigrayan and also Eritrea to be under, his ambition always has been to lead Ethiopia as Emperor of Ethiopia, to continue the empire of his ancestors maybe. But that discussion started to brew to start coalition of forces who are, it was a litmus test, like Fevena was saying earlier. That became a litmus test for Eritreans. Are we truly looking for a change in Eritrea to get rid of Isaias, or we have that kind of hatred towards Tigrayans, or especially the Weyanes? That caused the division within. That seeped lots of us that we are here. We wouldn't be here if that was not the cause today. So Amaniel started it, then the discussion continued, different organizations start to pile up together and start working and start writing about how to get rid of Isaias, how to work with, not just with Tigray or the other neighboring countries, even with the international community. So Prior to that, of course, all these organizations, all these whether organizations that were led by the youth or organizations that were led by the veteran fighters of the independence for Eritrea, none of them came to one formidable organization. So this litmus test or the sieve has started to show us a sign of coalition, sign of dividing who is real for change in Eritrea to get rid of Isaias, or to mend what Isaias do, just remove Isaias and Higdef continues. There are certain people, or even in the diaspora or in the movements, who believe in those kind of ideologies, and which is, of course, a continuation of Higdef means is, again, whether it's Isaias at the helm or somebody else, Higdef is a dangerous organization to the whole Horn of Africa. So now let me focus on FLC. Why did we think the need of FLC? FLC we started, of course, again, it's not just FLC, those 3 points that were raised, but we start working with different organizations based on regardless of your background. Because one of the obstacles that was in Eritrean opposition was, 20 years before today you were saying this, or you were saying this, you were saying about the Gaddafi like this, or about freedom fighters like this. All those preconditions we want to remove, and we start discussing with different groups, and we start. So the aim is, of course, to create a country that would have citizens and governments that believe in peaceful coexistence and economic prosperity with its neighbors. Instead of destructive wars, we want to build like any other country in the world does. Like even the US doesn't exist within itself. It needs a bilateral relationship with Canada, with Mexico, with Europe, with China, including China. They have bilateral economic relationship with China, regardless of what it looks like in the news. So, and also to bring all Eritrean organizations to work with people and from the neighboring countries for democratic transition in Eritrea and peaceful coexistence within the. And we also want to assure the Eritrean people that, and the people of the neighboring countries and international community, that Eritrea for the next several years will be different from the last 25 years. We want to assure to the international community we have better qualified humanly. Remember, that humanity is that which is lost in the current state of Eritrea, because they blew kids from age 13 through Ma'atot, through national service. At the age of 13 and 14, kids cannot be separated from their families. We know we have kids. The oldest I have is 10, of course. The rest of you, some of you have older kids. How hard it is to mold kids to be private good citizens. It's not, let alone at 13, even at 25. Our parents, until today, our parents, they tell us what to do. Okay? So that was one of the fabrics that was disintegrated by Sha'abia or Higdef regime. So we want to show that a constitutional democratic country will be present to the international community, first and most, of course, for Eritreans and its neighbors. So, why the binding principles within FLC are to work with all citizens regardless of religious background, racial, educational background, political background, or views, and place of origin. We want to avoid this division of he said this, he said this, he says this. And also to work with people and governments of our neighboring countries based on mutual and strategic partnership. It's not like Hakzuna will help us. It is, we have a lot to offer. If we have a peaceful country, we have a lot to offer as Eritreans. And that's why we are in these turmoil situations. Nobody wants us, the western part of the Red Sea, to be prosperous, because the other side of the Red Sea is using all the international, economic power or the usage of this very strategic geopolitical situations to their benefits. If we have a peaceful Horn of Africa, remember how many UAE Dubais we would have on this side. How many food cultivating countries would have given to the world, provide minerals, provide us. Africa in general can provide the whole world a lot of what China does right now can be provided by Africa, especially when it comes to the natural resources. So, of course, the human capital is being used, it's being dismantled because of the dictatorial nature of the regions. But in Eritrea, we don't have a dictator. We have a totalitarian, jealous government, a government that is jealous of its citizens. So, to work with regional and international communities on peaceful and non-discriminatory collaborations to the benefits of Eritrean people. We will partner with Eritrean, regional and global institutions that would like to work on the removal of the dictatorial regime that is putting Eritrea in this situation. So the minimal working strategies, what I was trying to allude to, are with all political, civic, and even individuals who have that tendency of understanding, believe in the sovereignty of Eritrea. The first and most must seek the removal of Isaias, not replacement or not mending or not changing somehow its structure. It's the whole PFDJ system has to be removed. And must accept mutual collaboration with the neighboring countries, especially with the people of Sudan, Tigray, and Ethiopia, and of course, Djibouti. So, how do we get out of this misery? Of course, work with like-minded Eritreans. We cannot bring all together into one pot and start working. We tried that. We thought by putting a number of people from different cities would work in movements like Yak, for example. It was hindering effect that people have that lingering issues in their brain that, okay, Isaias, if we remove Isaias, we will be okay. And the southern border of the Eritrea is always our enemies. They are not the same tribe like us. All those kind of things that we would like to broadening this space will of course help us in strengthening its foundation. To use all-inclusive measures, all-inclusive ways of removal of the system. It doesn't matter who you strategize with, it doesn't matter who you work with, as long as you put the Eritrean sovereignty and the rights of Eritreans in front, we should not be afraid of dealing with any country, let alone our neighbors, even with the international community. To work with all Eritrean forces to change and establish, following the removal, of course, we have to first remove the obstacles to even think about transition, to even think about democracy. We have to have that peaceful mind within the Eritrean mentality, and that facilitates smooth transition of power to the people of Eritrea. Then continue working with different organizations, because we have organizations who believe in different ideologies. Like, for example, we have different extremes of Eritreans. We want to bring all, we have to come back together and come to a democratic process, election that people choose their leaders. That is the constitutional government that we are looking for. That is the fourth step. The first thing that we have to do is work within us, like-minded people, then think of how to remove, working with anyone that is in that mindset, and of course working on the transitional government, and then eventually continue working with those forces to form a democratic country. So the future of Eritrea in FLC or SPDE's visions in the aftermath of the fall of this brutal regime, to see revival of our people back to normal life. We never lived a normal life. Yos was telling us earlier, she left the Western country to service her own people, and she faced lots of scrutinies. personal scrutinies, and also scrutinies that she sees in her students and in her colleagues. So, and restore the rights and dignity of Eritreans. We have a destroyed fabric of culture right now. People use that have no ties to the cultural ancestors that we have. We have youth that don't know what our backgrounds are, where we came from. We have a rich history. We have people, we had ancestors who used to elect their Tsigabu leaders every 4 years. That's what we see in 12th century. So we want to come. We will not going to get it in 50 years, of course. It will take a long, long time. The first step, of course, is after the removal of this brutal regime. Then, to have countries that have internal peace. Internal peace, of course, comes from democratic process, dialogue within the community, dialogue, tolerance. From dialogue, even within this group that we are in, we need to have a dialogue. Even though we think the same, our overall goal is the same, we may have differences. Those can be mended or can be resolved by dialogue. If you don't dialogue, if you don't appreciate the difference or acknowledge the differences we have with others, you cannot have a peaceful mind. A peaceful mind is necessary to bring a hopeful nation. A hopeful nation, of course, brings a prosperous nation or prosperous people. So, a peaceful Eritrea, when you think of, when I prepared this talk because I was going to introduce it, but when I heard Michael Rubin saying, Eritreans, you have what it takes to create this peace, to create this very useful country, the Singapore of Africa indeed, by working, not by just saying it and abusing its own people, by working for it. We believe the last 25 years was a missed opportunity for Eritreans and the neighboring countries, because we played, when I say we may not do individually, but the government that we think is representing us has caused havoc in all the way. I don't know, in 1996, we keep forgetting what happened in Zaire. Lots of Tagadal Eritreans perished in Zaire, trying to protect Mobutu Sese Seko or his sons. So all those havoc, we put ourselves in danger instead of making peace with ourselves and with our region. So in conclusion, what do we need going forward? Partnership with no preconditions among each other. Dialogue, dialogue, and dialogue that will narrow the differences and removal of the regime. First, we have to dialogue within ourselves to form a formidable force. Without a formidable force, international community wouldn't want to talk to us. Wouldn't want to remove even this cancerous person who is causing this all havoc, because they don't see, all they see is a divided opposition, a divided personalities. That egoistic and divided personality has to be resolved through dialogue. Then after removal of the regime, of course, we have to establish a transitional government, involve, then the fourth step, as I said, is involve Eritrean citizens in electing their own leaders and to establish a democratically and just Eritrea. So to work, even after a democratic country, we have to work together. We have to continue working because we have the minimum 50 years of revival. We may not see it in our generation. Our kids have to see that restoration of Eritrean culture and Eritrean dignity into normalcy. Thank you so much. I appreciate your attention.